Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. Tonight is November 14th, 2016, and it is post-election night. We are going to have our post-election show, so we'll cover a lot of the goings-on over the past week, and of course we have to address that the way forward and try to deal with the news as well. Now, before I get into all of that, I want to remind you that Truth on the Tracks can be heard every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that site, you'll find the archives, the YouTube videos, and the most recent articles of mine. You can also hear Truth on the Tracks being rebroadcast virtually every night on the network. And, of course, the archive of this show will be up at BrandonTurbeville.com, hopefully by Tuesday or on Tuesday. If you want to keep track of my work, I recommend naturalblaze.com, activistpost.com, eraofwisdom.org. And if you want to keep track of my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com. That's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the relevant information there. The books are available there for sale, and of course the articles go up on a daily basis. Generally, it's updated daily, and you can catch all that information there. There's lots of Twitter feeds and recommended sites and so forth at that site as well. So it's not just my work that you'll find there. You'll find links to other people's works and other portals. The site itself is sort of a portal. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the elections. Might as well jump into this at the beginning. The victor of the elections is Donald J. Trump. So we have mocked the elections for months. Orange Hitler versus Grandma Stalin. Orange Hitler has won out. So I think we should take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we did apparently avoid the worst case scenario, meaning a Hillary Clinton presidency. Those of you who listen to my show regularly and are readers of my site know that for the past year and a half really, I have been warning about Hillary Clinton. I've been warning about how she was the oligarch's choice and how we must stop a Hillary Clinton presidency. I wrote a book about Hillary Clinton, The Difference It Makes, 36 Reasons Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President. And we can say the book did what it was supposed to do. Hillary Clinton is not president and will not be president unless on December 19th we have some historic levels of chicanery and the Electoral College goes against the Electoral College, but the electors of the Electoral College go against the process, the voting process, the Electoral College process. They go against the voters themselves. It will be historic in its chicanery. But barring that happening, and there is, of course, reason to be wary of that, barring that happening, it will be President Trump in 2017. And obviously, there is some slight cause for celebration here that we avoided the worst possible case scenario. Unfortunately, now what we have is the second worst case scenario, and we have to be prepared to deal with that. After Clinton lost, you could see this, a lot of people of goodwill, a lot of activists, a lot of researchers were joyous, if not outright ecstatic, that the Wicked Witch of the West is finally gone, or at least we hope she's finally gone. No more shrieking and cackling in public. Hopefully she's relegated to the Clinton Foundation. We certainly hope that she'll be relegated to a jail cell, but for now she's relegated to the Clinton Foundation, the occasional shriek and cackle on some commentary. Other people just simply acknowledge that we've got a power shift, right? There's a change in the actual platform, the actual puppet in power, and that there's going to be no discernible difference between a Trump administration and an Obama administration, just like we had the Bush-Obama years being seamless in their transition. But we might take some relief in knowing that we avoided the absolute worst case scenario, but that relief should be temporary. We got to ask now, what now? We are faced with Donald Trump as president in 2017, so what do we do? Do we join the Trump team, become a cult follower, become a Trumpeteer like other outlets have already done? Should we support Trump until he does something terrible or commits a series of terrible acts? Or should we start attacking him immediately and relentlessly? Now, obviously, complacency is not an option. And I would say none of those strategies are necessarily the best option. Simply sitting back because the outcome was not as bad as it could have been is entirely useless and counterproductive. And I hope nobody listens to this show or reads my articles is leaning towards that. The first thing I want to point out is that it is imperative that activists and people of goodwill recognize that a Trump victory is not necessarily a victory for the American people. A Hillary Clinton defeat, although positive, doesn't necessarily equal a win for America, at least in none of those simplistic terms. Right now, it is time for organization and it's time for action. Whether you're an activist organization, people of goodwill in general, you've got to immediately begin to prepare yourself for a new phase in a battle that you, at least hopefully, already have been fighting all along. You're going to have a new phase of it in 2017. You've got to begin to put aside petty differences with one another and start looking at areas of common concern. You've got to continue your individual battles, but you've also got to form alliances with one another in order to fight in a unified front under a common umbrella. So whether the cause is related to guns, to the drug war, to war in general, GMOs, some other issue, these individuals and organizations have to come to understand the concept of enlightened mutual self-interest. Many of the groups in the areas of interest that I just mentioned currently don't work together because they're either busy squabbling with each other or they're quite simply too lazy to build coalitions. And we need individuals who are willing to establish connections with these groups and act as a uniting factor between them. This includes individual activists as well as groups, and we need somebody who's going to be the unifying factor by establishing contacts, by finding policies that unifies these groups, and then helping to unite them, basically acting as a central figure in current fights for or against legislation and supporting strategically offensive legislation. So these individuals need to be active. You've got to be active, and you've got to be willing to engage in dialogue with a wide, varying types of groups. You got to remain respectful of everybody's perspectives and personal agreements, disagreements with some of their policies, but you've got to be able to work with them. These coalitions can be brought together across the barriers of their issues, and we can do that in a way that it's set up for demands that are of interest to everybody. Now, as for demands, any movement that is trying to bring about positive change must have a list of requirements in the form of demands, or else the movement itself is simply dead from the start. A list of demands and a set of steady principles are absolutely necessary to the success and the continued life of any movement. So if you're struggling with the idea of what demands need to be central to your resistance movement going forward, then I want you to go take a look at my article, A Real New Deal for America, 43 Points, is up at BrandonTurbeville.com, and you can access it right there. It's on the right-hand side of the page. Scroll down a bit and just click on it. It'll come up. That's your list of demands. So where Trump and his administration, this is how we're going to approach Trump, okay? Trump and his administration, if they're willing to forward any points of our agenda, we should be right there to push him along. If he's willing to forward the agenda of the Anglo-American system instead, then we've got to be there and be willing to fight him tooth and nail. So the issue here, and I would say the issue, but the important aspect of what I'm trying to say is that we as activists, as the resistance movement, are going to be guided not by Donald Trump, but by our own sets of principles and demands. This is the problem with what you see in the street today. This is the problem with the protests that are taking place all across the country. The left, not all of the left, not real liberals, again, they voted for Jill Stein, or they sat out, because Hillary Clinton voters are not liberals. But the general left, the fools that you see in the street today, are not guided by principles. They're not anti-war. They're not anti-police state. They're not anti-police brutality. They're not anti-drug war. They're not anti-prison industrial complex. They're not anti-capitalism. They're not anti-socialism. They're not anti or pro anything. They are lemmings. And the reason I say that is because they are guided by one thing. That is the trends. They're guided by their news media. They're guided by their social media. And they're guided by what they're told is trendy. And right now it's trendy to hate Donald Trump. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that in a minute. But look at the people out in the streets. Riots even. Protests all over the country. I have a question for you, dear leftists. Where the hell have you been for 8 years? Pouring out into the streets all over the country as if it was an anti-war movement. Only it's not, but it should have been, and it should have been for 8 years. How many wars do you have? Bush, Afghanistan, Iraq, Obama. We can add those two, Afghanistan and Iraq, but we can also add Libya, Syria, Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia. What about the American operations out in Niger and Chad? What about in Nigeria? What about those operations? Nobody seems to be talking about those either. And of course, the left is silent. They don't give a damn that people are being slaughtered overseas. They don't even give a damn that those people being slaughtered overseas are black in Libya. They don't give a damn about any of that. They don't care about war. They don't care about innocent people. They don't care about black people. All they care about is what's trendy and their political party, their cult of personality, which is Hillary Clinton, and their Democratic Party. If you weren't out in the streets screaming about war for the last 8 years, or if you weren't at least screaming about war for the last 8 years, you're not a liberal and you're not anti-war. You're either completely an idiot or you're sold out to a political party. So stop calling yourself progressive, stop calling yourself liberal, and stop calling yourself anti-war, because you're not. That is clear. If you voted for Hillary Clinton, the person who had a 100% pro-war record, you're not an anti-war person. There were people in the race who had better policies on war. Okay, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, just those two. If you were interested in the war issue, not Hillary Clinton, she was the worst of all possible options. So now we see people all out in the street who can barely conjure up a thought. We've been seeing protests now for 2 days. I'd like to know what in the hell the protests are about. Are they about the fact that they're concerned that Donald Trump's going to launch a war? Are they about the economic degradation? What are they about? Nobody knows. There's no demands. All we see are occasional complaints about Donald Trump and phantoms of racism, sexism, homophobia, of which we've seen zero. That's what we have to be aware of this, right? These are phantoms, and these are issues that were created directly by the media. Not taking up for Trump. Again, we know what's about to happen, and we should point out, too, that in looking at the policies that Trump has set forward, look at the healthcare situation. He's laid forth a few points, not as bad as it could have been. If he sticks with these, I think 7 points, we'll go through that. What we argue for is Medicare for all, paid for by a 1% Wall Street sales tax and at least a nationalized Federal Reserve, where Medicare is essentially extended to all Americans, the poorest receiving it for free, and small fees as you move up the economic ladder. That keeps the private system intact if you want it, and it makes sure that every single person that wants insurance or health care in this country has access to it, and doesn't cost us a dime. It only costs 1% of the turnover of Wall Street derivatives and other types of flash trading, e-trading, and turnover, and that sort of thing. So that's what we want. Compared to the Hillary Clinton method of continuing with the individual mandate and so forth, the Trump plan is not as bad as we know that it could be. And of course, this is the plan that's set forth on November 9th, November 11th. This show's being recorded on November 11th, by the way. So it's not as bad as it could be, but on November 11th, this is the plan. We'll see what it is in January of 2017, see if it changes as the advisors come in and as the Trumpeteers solidify power. Now, guns. Trump has already said that he does not support any more gun legislation. This is what he said in recent days, and that there's even the floating of the idea of some type of national reciprocity in terms of concealed carry. Well, you know what? Good. We'll support that, and that's what I'm saying. What I've said earlier is where he's willing to forward part of our agenda, then we'll push him along. You want to get a national concealed carry going, Trump? Then fine, we'll do it. We'll work with you. We'll get that national concealed carry through. But you want to start a war? You want to lower wages? You want to bust unions? Then we're going to fight you tooth and nail, and that's what we have to do. And the reason we can do that is because, again, we're guided by principles and by demands, meaning we support a 1% Wall Street sales tax. We oppose the war on Syria, and we don't care if it's Donald Trump, if it's Hillary Clinton, or if it's Barack Obama. We still oppose the war on Syria. We support gun rights, whether it's Obama, Clinton, or Trump. It doesn't matter. They can change the presidents all you want, but our demands remain the same. And that is why we can remain focused even though we have different heads of state, or alleged heads of state, right? We have to remember, too, this is a lot bigger than a president. And anybody who's even slightly informed needs to be aware of that. But it's time for the American people to become active and engaged and stop sitting idly by, stop navel-gazing and being castrated by your own egos and selfish interests, but also not becoming emotional and irrational and running out into the middle of the street and destroying other people's property for something you don't even understand, for something you don't even know why you're fighting for or against. These people in the street have no idea what they're fighting for or against. And now we are beginning to see the direction in which this administration might be taking us, right? We have the possibility that under a Trump administration, after a year and a half of incessant race baiting and gender baiting and gender preference baiting of the media, to the point where everyone is convinced that Donald Trump is a racist with no evidence. Everyone's convinced that he's a rapist, and actually there is some evidence for that. But the idea is that because of some crude comments that the guy's a misogynist. And again, that is not that's the way the media presents it, but it's not necessarily the case. And of course, all of this media repetition has gotten a portion of the population paranoid and so completely radicalized and ill-informed that that you have many black people now truly believing that white racists are going to come out of the woodwork and start attacking them now that Donald Trump is president. And on the other hand, you have so much on the right side of things that have broadcast images and stereotypes of black people and foreigners, immigrants, and so forth, that you have people on the right ready, paranoid and afraid of them as well. And of course, as many times as the media constantly blames white people for everything and drums up racial attacks on the part of minorities against whites, then whites eventually become radicalized themselves and want to respond, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, what we're seeing under the Trump administration is the possibility that this division in society will continue. And I'm not trying to predict things here, but we're seeing that this division in society could in fact continue to the point where there is not just civil unrest, but outright conflict between racial groups, between political groups, between religious groups. And we are talking about some type of civil unrest up to the possibility of a civil war. And if there is violence to the point that the cities are in flames, and we are heading in that direction, that the city life is so unpleasant as blacks start attacking whites, and as whites start responding and attacking blacks, and as Republicans and Democrats start fighting one another, as conservatives and liberals start throwing punches, and gays and straights, etc., if all this descends into so much chaos that the average person finds the city or the area unlivable under this chaos and violence, then we see that the average person will welcome a militarized police force that's been built up over the last 15 years, actually 20 years, of slow incremental militarization that'll come in and crack heads and will be scarcely indistinguishable from the U.S. military, willing to do their jobs at all costs, right? To crack down and have total martial law. That is the possibility if this stuff continues. And of course, we have the hands of George Soros all in this, stoking up riots, stoking up violence, as he always does. And of course, also stoking up part of the response to it as well. Not just the social justice warrior fanatics, the idiots in the street, but also the pro-Trumpers, the Trumpeteers, are also being supported by a lot of these shadowy people. So, we need to look also at the possibility and the incredible possibility that Trump is not what his supporters think he is. So, take a look at the video done by Cassius Camorampi of Era of Wisdom. One of the things that we want to look at, we need to look at some of the real connections. And one of the things that we need to point out is look at who Donald Trump's campaign finance chair is and who may become Secretary of the Treasury. That's Steve Mnuchin. Steve Mnuchin is from Yale. Very rich guy. He's a movie producer. He produced Suicide Squad. He founded the company Rat Pack Dune Entertainment, which had X-Men and the Avatar movies. He personally produced a war propaganda movie, some of you may remember, American Sniper, which glorified Chris Kyle, the psychopath Chris Kyle, and Rat Pack Dune Entertainment was involved in that. Steve Mnuchin worked for Soros briefly at Soros Fund Management. Interesting enough, we also want to mention that Donald Trump, as well as Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, were both very close friends with the convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. This is something that is very disturbing, but it should tell you a lot, right? We have Donald Trump flying on the same jet, Epstein's sex slave jet. Both Clinton and Trump have been entertained on Epstein's private Caribbean island, where he hosted a lot of orgies with underage girls. And, of course, Prince Andrew was there as well at different times. So that is something to be looked at. Naughty comments, locker room talk with Billy Bush is not something to be concerned about. But flying on the jet of Jeffrey Epstein is indeed something to be concerned about. And we also look at the fact that Trump seems to be trying to stock his administration with establishment insiders and Bush-era neocons. We won't go through all of these right now, but there are a lot of individuals who were prominent in the Bush administration, or at least the Bush ideology during the Bush term, who are looking at a possible return during a Trump administration. Now, the advisors and the cabinet are something we're going to be paying very close attention to over the next few weeks, and we'll try to bring you more on that. That's going to be very important to certainly let people know where Trump stands. But again, we're going to be guided by our demands and guided by our principles and not by party or cult of personality. Let's see what else I want to do. George Soros. I guess I need to mention a little more about Soros. A number of these protests that are taking place across the country are indeed funded by outside organizations. For instance, there are protests in Austin, I believe, where protesters were bussed in, and whenever that happens, you have to ask who is bussing these people in. And in this case, MoveOn.org has been organizing a lot of the protests. And who is MoveOn.org funded by but George Soros? We have the Answer Coalition, who has been helping instigate a lot of these things. It's Soros. That's Soros funding them as well. So we know Soros has been a part of all kinds of color revolutions all across the world, and of course they want to do that here as well. We have the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation that needs to be watched as well. We are hearing reports that there might be some connections there. Remember, it was the Trump rallies in California and New York, the destabilizations what took place in New York and California at the Trump rallies were supported and funded by Soros, right? And this was not necessarily because Trump is an enemy of Soros. Remember, Soros was very helpful in bailing out one of Trump's financial adventures in New York. So that's important to remember. And again, these are things that we'll go into in more depth in the next week or so. What I want to do now to get the idea across that we are living in a very important and very dangerous time, I want to read an article, well, not really an article, but a statement by Bouthania Shaban, the advisor, the political and media advisor to Bashar al-Assad, because she recently took to social media to condemn what she called an attitude of racism and supremacism that accompanies the Western policies. And what she also said in this the statement was that we are living in a time that will determine the future of the world. And she's right. We are indeed living in a time that will determine the direction in which the world is going to go for not only the near but the distant future, for our children and our children's children. And I want to read her statement if I can. It's lengthy, but I want to try to get this across. She says, in a world where lies and rumors replace facts and become central to the corporate media narrative, in such a world you only feel absolute comfort when you sit down with friends, allies, and partners who share your principles, values, and ethical standards, and do not dispute the fundamentals of your principles and objectives. As you go smoothly through the meeting's agenda simply because everyone means what he says and does what he promises, you start thinking about the difficulties you face with the other side, and you remember that the reasons behind the pointless discussion with their officials are lack of honesty and the contradictions between their true motives and what they express in public. Right there, you sense what is wrong with our world today and what is the main source for the troubles we face, ranging from wasting time and pointless discussion all the way to the loss of innocent lives, the destruction of countries, and denying entire generations the right to education and a free and dignified life. The foreign ministers of the Russian Federation, the Syrian Arab Republic, and the Islamic Republic of Iran met in Moscow, and it was clear that all of them are departing from a deep belief in the sovereignty of states, a rejection of foreign intervention, and the right of people to decide their fate away from foreign dictates, a rejection of land grabbed by force, and absolute solidarity with people suffering injustice and the loss of their rights. And when the discussion is based upon such principles and on the duty of ideas, values, and ethics, it is not too difficult for such a discussion to reach important strategic conclusions, which would shape the future. In such a meeting, hegemonic, colonial, and superior attitudes are completely absent, and you start to remember how hateful the racist approach present in meetings with Westerners, which demands you prove your innocence at every juncture, thus robbing you of your humanity and your right to be treated equal, which should have been a non-issue in the first place. In the Moscow meeting, I saw the coming world in which our children and grandchildren would live, a world devoid of racism, a world in which politicians, the media, and all people are honest and respectful of all human beings regardless of race, gender, or creed. A world all the inhabitants of which, wherever they may be, feel a sense of belonging and share a stake in its preservation and progress. A world in which everyone accepts and cherishes the different cultures and languages and sees them as a gift from God rather than a pretext for national and racial supremacist claims. For despite all what Westerners and their media claim, the truth is that Western treatment of all countries is a racist and supremacist treatment that seeks to advance the interests of the West at the expense of the rest of the world. Looking at this coming world, I feel that the sacrifices of our martyrs and wounded were not only for us, but also for all mankind, for a better world and for a better future. Looking at this future world, I am certain that we are living in a difficult phase of history resulting from the difference between what the West says and what it does, because it is fighting to preserve its colonial ways and its preferred methods of humiliating, destroying, and looting other peoples for its own benefit. Looking at the future of our children and grandchildren, I feel that the battle we are fighting today was inevitable, and that it is for the greater good and for a better future for the coming generations. In this rich and constructive meeting in Moscow, I felt that the entire world is uniting to reject once and for all the concept of hegemony and to reconstruct international relations on the basis of parity, of respect, and shared interests. Wherever I go and whenever I write, I never forget to pay homage to the souls of our martyrs and wish a speedy recovery to our wounded brave soldiers, because their blood and suffering are the torch that lights the path to freedom and dignity. I also do not forget to salute everyone who believed in the inevitability of victory, despite all the difficulties, and worked hard to achieve this victory, offering his life, money, effort, and prayers. As for the traitors, culprits, war profiteers, and those who call on the enemy to invade their country, they will be forgotten and they will never appear in the pages of history ever again. That's the end quote. That's Dr. Butania Shaban, the political and media advisor to to President Bashar al-Assad of Syria. And if you want to read that, you can check out my article, Assad Advisor Says We Are in a Time That Will Determine the Future of the World. And we are indeed in a time that will determine the future of the world. This is why I harp so much on having demands and taking action, because this is our window of opportunity. This is indeed the time in which a change will be made, a decision will be made in terms of the direction of the country. Now, with that, not just the country but the world, but with that, I want to lead into some other issues regarding the election. And this is not Trump, not Hillary, but this is some of the referendums. Now, we mentioned some candidates out in California who were running for office, local office. They did win, and we congratulate them. We mentioned the Bill Bledsoe campaign. Unfortunately, that campaign was not successful here in South Carolina. Tim Scott remains the senator. But I want to mention some referendums that took place across the country. The big winner of this election is, of course, marijuana. We have Florida, Arkansas, and North Dakota voted to allow marijuana for medical purposes. Very small step in the right direction. There was, unfortunately, the people of Arizona should have proven that they perhaps shouldn't be voting, because the recreational pot proposal there lost as well. But what passed was some real dumbass gun legislation, I believe, was also in Arizona. Or perhaps I'm mistaken. I know California and a couple of other states approved some unconstitutional gun laws. So hopefully we can get rid of some of those. There was an outcome of the Maine marijuana bill that was too close to call. We still don't know the answer to that. But California, Nevada, and Massachusetts have approved measures legalizing recreational marijuana. And we have here guns were the losers actually in the referendum, but we'll fight that a little later. We're going to have to come back to that. We also had, in terms of the minimum wage, Arizona, Colorado, and Maine approved measures phasing in a $12 minimum hourly wage by 2020. Washington State, the minimum wage is already $9.47 an hour. They approved a measure to raise it to $13.50 an hour by 2020. So, again, the real winner here was marijuana, and we want to keep pushing on that issue. It's important to stay on that issue. Unfortunately, there were a lot of negative results in terms of the referendum, and we'll deal with that in the future, because right now we have to move on to the foreign affairs segment of the show. As everyone is focused on the elections, we have the United States and Turkey announcing a new plan to defeat ISIS, allegedly, or the same terrorist organization that both countries have funded and created and armed and facilitated since day one in Syria. The plan is revolving around the conquering, occupation, and then governing of sovereign Syrian territory in the east, most notably in Raqqa. According to the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, after meeting with his Turkish counterpart, quote, "The coalition and Turkey will work together on the long-term plan for seizing, holding, and governing Raqqa." That's a quote. A statement by Dunford seems to confirm the fact that the United States will not move forward in its campaign for Raqqa without working closely with the Turks, who are themselves concerned about the makeup of the proxy forces that are going to be holding power once the campaign is over. The Syrian Democratic Forces, who are the proxies of choice in this battle, are made up of a number of different Kurdish militias and fighters, which is an issue that provides a lot of problems for the Turks, or the Turkish government. But we have reports coming, Department of Defense news, saying that Sunday's meeting reinforced a long-standing agreement that the U.S.-led coalition would not move ahead with the seizure of Raqqa without incorporating the Turks and their perspective into our plans, according to Dunford. The Turkish army then came out and said in a statement that the military heads had discussed the methods of a common struggle against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, especially in Al-Bab and Raqqa in coming days. They discussed the ethnic makeup of the forces. Dunford said, quote, "We always knew the SDF wasn't the solution for holding and governing Raqqa. What we are working on right now is to find the right mix of forces for the operation." He said the U.S. was going to work with Turkey to determine the composition of the forces that were going to seize and govern the territory. They wanted locals to lead the mission to retake the city and run it after ISIS was driven out. He says the operation needs a predominantly Arab and Sunni Arab force, and there are forces like that. There's the moderate Syrian opposition, the vetted Syrian forces, and the Free Syrian Army forces, and there is some initial outreach to forces in Raqqa proper. That's what he said. According to Dunford, he also says the SDF was moving south to isolate ISIS positions in Raqqa and the surrounding areas, and that it would take a few months to do so. But essentially, the U.S. and Turkey are devising a plan by which to control Raqqa and the territory surrounding it by using proxy forces to overthrow other proxy forces. Basically, the fighters in Raqqa are simply going to undergo another name change. They're going to be replaced with a heavy Kurdish contingent and act as a carefully placed chess piece, because they're going to prevent the Syrian or Russian militaries from liberating the city. After all, these SDF forces are going to be presented as moderate, which is a label that cannot be attached to the ISIS fighters that are inhabiting Raqqa. Really can't be attached to the SDF if you want to be accurate, but if it's just for propaganda purposes, then you can do it. Now, Raqqa has acted as the ISIS capital since the appearance of the group 2 years ago, and has gone virtually untouched since the military has been bogged down. The Syrian military has been bogged down in major cities and western areas, central areas of the country against the Western-backed terrorists. So despite the rhetoric of fighting to degrade and destroy ISIS, the U.S.-led coalition has yet to bomb Raqqa. Hasn't done that yet. On the heels of a major public relations victory in Palmyra, the Syrian military is inching forward in the battle for Raqqa, and it's moving toward Raqqa. It's what we've been labeling the race for Raqqa. And if it is able to take and liberate Raqqa, it will score one of the biggest victories in the war yet. It's not just because it's the de facto ISIS capital, or because the Syrian military will be gaining a little more territory. It's because the liberation of Raqqa is going to be another example of how the Syrian military will have accomplished in weeks what the U.S. and the coalition members have claimed would take a decade to do. It's going to be another instance where the lack of will on the part of the United States to actually destroy Daesh is put on display for the rest of the world, either causing the U.S. to look weak in the eyes of the world or actually exposing it for supporting the terrorist organizations to begin with. So the victory for the Syrian government is going to be twofold regardless, unless the U.S. gets there first. And the U.S. has been using the presence of ISIS in Syria as an excuse to bomb and send special forces, publicly support terrorists, possibly invade since ISIS came on the scene 2 years ago. But despite the rhetoric, the United States and its coalition have not bombed Raqqa, in a manner that's worth noting. They've largely abstained from bombing any other terrorist group as well. The U.S. focused on bombing Syrian military targets and civilian infrastructure and acting as a deterrent to the Syrian militaries and movement in many of these rebel-held areas of the country. So the U.S. seems to have great interest in Raqqa, and it's aiding a loose collection of terrorists and fanatical Kurds and Arabs and under the name Syrian Democratic Forces in battles around the ISIS capital. So why the sudden interest in Raqqa? It's fairly simple. The U.S. clearly sees that the Syrian military and the Russian allies are going to liberate the city soon enough, and it does not want to suffer another public relations setback. A defeat for ISIS would be a humiliation for the United States. And that fact alone should raise some eyebrows. The fact that ISIS being defeated is a humiliation to the U.S. The U.S. wants to have its own victory in Raqqa, but the Syrians and the Russians can have theirs. And if the SDF is able to take Raqqa, the U.S. will then be able to shout from the rooftops that America has liberated Raqqa and defeated ISIS in its own capital. The U.S. also has another goal in Raqqa, which is the theft of more Syrian territory by using proxy forces going by the name of the SDF. Whether or not ISIS proper is in control of Raqqa is just a secondary concern for the United States. If the SDF succeeds in imposing control over the city and the province, then the West will have succeeded in cementing control over the area in the hands of the proxy terrorists again, but with another incarnation of the same Western-backed jihadist fanaticism. The U.S. could then use the moderate rebel label to keep Russia and Syria from bombing the fighters who really assumed a position handed to them through some level of violence by ISIS, but handed to them nonetheless. This allows the Western powers who are supporting their terrorist proxies the opportunity to provide the terrorists with a parcel of land inside Syria's borders so they can use that land as a forward operating base and a staging ground for more attacks and operations launched at the rest of the country. With the situation as it stands, there's now the very real possibility of some type of major confrontation taking place in Raqqa that could have international ramifications. On one hand, we have the Syrian military backed by the Russian Air Force and Russian Special Forces that are heading east to Raqqa. On the other side, there's the SDF backed by the U.S. Air and Special Forces heading towards Raqqa from the east to the west. So both are in a race to gain control of the ISIS capital. Both are going to want to gain territory and declare victory for the world, but what if they arrive in Raqqa at the same time? That's the question. In other words, there's a distinct potential for the fact that in the race for Raqqa, the Syrian-Russian alliance might find itself face-to-face with the possibility of direct military conflict with the U.S. SDF terrorist alliance. And at that point, the question will be who, if either, will back down. If both forces decide to push forward, the result could be devastating not only for Syria, but for the rest of the world. Regardless, it's important to remember that the Syrian military is acting entirely in self-defense against the terrorists posing as rebels and the United States. Russia, Iran, Hezbollah have all been invited into Syria. They're all acting legally. They're all acting with the assent of the Syrian government. But the United States and its coalition are once again acting completely outside of international law in an attempt to shore up its proxy terrorists. And again, the United States and its coalition, the willing, is pushing the patience of the rest of the world. And we can never lose sight of that fact. Now, we are also happy to announce that just a few moments ago, again, this is being recorded on November the 11th, the Syrian military has, being spearheaded by the Tiger forces, were able to impose full control over the Dahiyat al-Assad suburb. It's been a 2-day battle with the jihadists of Jaish al-Fatah al-Sham, Jaish al-Fatah, his army of conquest. The capture of the suburb is just hours after the Syrian military launched a powerful assault in that area. The Syrian military and its allies have captured Minyan, which is the neighboring area, the neighboring town, along with a few adjacent sites that were needed to secure that suburb. This is a Syrian military counteroffensive that actually began on October 6th, and it's effectively reversed almost all of the jihadist gains. It's only leaving the Akrab area left to go before they can assume control over every site that they had held previously at one point. The 1070 housing project, or the 1070 apartment complex, has been secured. The SAA's supply line to government-held West Aleppo has now been expanded at its narrowest point. So that's important. And of course, the Syrian military now has control over the 1070 apartment complex, although the terrorists are continuing to lob random shells into the area as civilians try to escape. Now, in terms of key districts, important districts, we also had another important development today. The Iraqi army has reportedly entered the strategic district of Qadsiya today. That was the fierce battle with ISIS there, but they have now entered that district. According to the official media page for the Iraqi army, their forces entered the district from the eastern corridor after a surprise assault this morning. And the Iraqi army currently controls about 10 districts in Mosul's eastern sector, but they still have a long way to go. And ISIS is doing whatever it can to forestall their move forward. We also have a development now in Yemen. The Houthi forces have launched a powerful attack against the Saudi coalition in the Jizan region of southern Saudi Arabia, and they have actually captured several villages after a battle that lasted about a day. According to the Yemeni Republican Guard's official Twitter account, the Houthis have managed to capture the villages of Al-Qarn and Dafine after overrunning the Saudi army's defenses in the Al-Qubayt district on Thursday. And we have after the capture of Al-Qarn and Dafine, the Houthi forces advanced east of the Batit military base and seized several small villages that were under the Saudi army's control. As a result of the assault in Jizan, the Houthis destroyed 2 tanks, Abrams tanks, and several armored vehicles that were mounted with machine guns that belonged to the Saudis. So we've made some gains militarily in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. I guess we could briefly mention the fit throwing of the Israelis yet again. We have on Monday the Israelis formally rejecting France's invitation to take part in a Middle East peace conference in Paris later on this year, saying it was a distraction from the goal of direct negotiations with the Palestinians, which of course means murder and destruction. There was a meeting in Jerusalem with Israel's acting national security advisor, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's diplomatic advisor, French envoy Pierre Vimont. He was informed that Israel wanted nothing to do with the effort to revive talks that broke down in 2014. The statement from Netanyahu's office says, quote, "They told the French envoy in a clear and unequivocal manner that Israel's position to promote the peace process and reach an agreement will only come through direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority." End quote. So there was no immediate comment from Vimont, but the Foreign Ministry of France said it still planned to hold the conference before the end of the year, whatever good that will do. France has repeatedly attempted to create negotiations for the Israelis and Palestinians. Basically, I think this is an example of France attempting to prove itself relevant in a world in which it's irrelevant. But nevertheless, the Israelis can't even throw them that bone, and will not take place, or not take part, not participate in those elections, in those peace talks and negotiations. Now we've got just a couple minutes left. We also had an alarming incident. We had a Dutch submarine on Wednesday morning that tried to approach the Russian aircraft carrier group in the Mediterranean and spy on it. This was the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov announcing what had happened. He says, earlier today at 6:50 on November 9th, the search and attack group consisting of anti-submarine ships, the Severomorsk and the Vice Admiral Kulikov, spotted a diesel submarine of the Dutch Navy, presumably Walrus, which had tried to approach the Northern Fleet's aircraft carrier group for surveillance purposes. The crews of 2 anti-submarine ships, the Severomorsk and the Vice Admiral Kulikov, easily identified the submarine that was 20 kilometers away using the standard onboard hydroacoustic systems and data obtained from the anti-submarine helicopters K-827PL. The Northern Fleet's anti-submarine ships forced the submarine to leave the area where Russia's Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier was at the moment. Despite the submarine's attempts to evade surveillance, the hydroacoustic system was established. Contact was established with it, and the ships kept track of the submarine for about an hour and forced it to leave the area where the aircraft carrier group was at. So the Konashenkov says, quote, "The clumsy attempts to carry out dangerous maneuvers in the direct proximity of the Russian group of warships could have led to grave navigation consequences." Indeed, they could have. Again, this is useless provocation, and it's something that's incredibly dangerous and can lead us directly down the path of some type of major confrontation. Now that the elections are over and we've talked about a way forward, I want to remind everybody to go check out the article at BrandonTurbeville.com. Scroll down the page, right-hand side of the page, A Real New Deal for America, 43 points, and take a look at the list of demands and start getting organized. You should be girding yourself, girding your loins, and being prepared for action. I mentioned also in the past show that individuals should be prepared for the worst as well. So I want to reiterate, financially, in terms of self-defense, in terms of food and water, I would suggest that people start preparing for to hunker down at some point if they need to, but also getting active. And again, A Real New Deal for America, 43 points. Those are your demands. You should take a look at those and get out and get active. And one of the other things we're going to do is we're going to soon release a plan similar to the 43 points, but based at the state level and based on the local level, basically rural America. This is going to be this is something that you can use as a demand and a guiding set of principles for local elections, state elections, and for activism, and for a plan forward, a vision for areas with the lack of support coming from the federal level. This is something that individuals can do at the state level and the local levels, and we're going to be releasing those soon as well. The goal is to get as many solutions out there as possible, and demands and platform program points, so that people, visionaries, activists, and history makers, game changers, can take these ideas and make them a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. We'll see you next week.
They told us to pack up our bags and head south. They said that the luck of the Irish ran out. They told us they burned down our farms and our stores. They cursed us for cowards and our wives for whores. Our brother John was out plowing the field. A group of armed Yankees rode up on his heels. They never gave him a chance to throw steel. Fired at him till his young body lay still. The cries of our mother rang out through the land as the blood of our brother dried over the sand. We knew it was time to make our final stand. The wrath of the Irish would soon be at hand. The wrath of the Irish would soon be at hand. We saddled our horses and rode it first night. 6 loaded revolvers, each strapped by our sides. Rode into town, our 3 brothers and I, to bring death and hell to all those Yankees died. But I knew the whole town was stained with their blood. Someday we must see my
You are listening to UCY.tv. Why don't you stick around for more awesome radio?